it's Drybear. Now that we've been, 2 patches into Season 3 for the First Descendant, they're over a year out. I mean, it came out last year in the summer, so we're like a year and some months over that as well. I wanted to give my perspective on the state of the First Descendant right now, what they do well, what they do not so well, and how that can represent for the game going into the future, and what changes that I would like to see them make in general. This could be useful for people that are brand new to the game, kind of wondering what a veteran's perspective is, or people that maybe you've been playing a lot and you've been falling off a little bit or have stopped playing since, or maybe everything in between. What I'm going to present here is my perspective given my background and my experience with the game in general, but you're welcome to share your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments. And again, keep in mind, I'm going to be critical of some things and not critical of other things. It doesn't mean that those things are horrendous and terrible, but I think there's always going to be a level of criticism that can be made just from a perspective of what is good about the game, what's bad about it, and what can improve. And we'll start from the good stuff and work our way to the not so good stuff. Now, the first thing that's on the pro side that I want to give them kind of kudos for is just the general fidelity of the game. This isn't even on max graphics, this isn't on max graphics, but I think in general, like, they just do a really good job of making the game look really good, which is not something that every game can do. I mean, realistically, having an art team and the supporting teams that can actually make that work is not something that every studio has access to. And I think in general, even though it is an Unreal 5 game, I think it actually is one of the more, attractive, pretty, like, high fidelity games out there on the market. And it's really, really strong from that perspective. Now, I want to separate the fidelity of the game from the style of the game. I think this is very important and something that you learn as you start looking at works of art and works of technology like this, is that I think in general, the style, like the art style of the game in general, is a little vanilla. I mean, they do have some tech elements mixing with fantasy elements. It is still a little more, it's more sci-fi than anything else. And I think there's definitely some comments you can make on that in general. I think they generally tend to go for safer designs and perspectives, and their art style is generally a little more vanilla than I would like. But it doesn't mean that everything needs to be, crazy, like proportions all over the place, really stylistic choices or stylistic rendering styles that make the game seem really unique. I think it's perfectly fine to have a game that's really high fidelity, well made and delivered, and just looks really pretty in general. And this goes from the characters, the textures, the model quality, the mapping on them, the lighting, the environment, and everything in between. And I think that people that like run into the game for the first time and walk around and look at the environments and the characters and the weather, all that stuff, will generally be impressed with the quality of it. I think the character is probably the biggest selling point for the game in general, but kind of just having this as a perspective, I think the game is generally high fidelity, and they should be praised for that. I think they have a very good art team that kind of is supporting the game and the releases that they have over time, which is not something every game can tout. Now, it is worth mentioning that it is a UE5 game. UE5 by default does have kind of some really good opportunities and systems that allow it to create high quality or high fidelity games by default, but the fact that everything here is custom assets and kind of developed that way, I think in general the character quality, the perspective quality, especially if you're on cinematic, the way they handle lighting and everything, the game itself looks great and generally has very high fidelity, which is a really big pro for the game overall. And on that same note, since we're talking about Unreal 5, I think they also should be commended for their engineering, like the programmers, the engineers, everyone that like handles that kind of thing. I think they do a really good job. Games that look this good typically don't run well. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there aren't issues with FPS drops or crashes and things like that. That's always going to be the case. But I think if you're looking at it from a bird's eye perspective, looking down on the game in general, games that look this good do not perform this well on average, especially if they're Unreal 5. Historically, I think Unreal 5 has been one of the most unstable, ubiquitous level engines that we've seen. And what I mean by that is that it's one of the most used engines on the planet. A lot of people learn Unreal, and a lot of studios use Unreal in general. And historically, if I've gotten to the point where if I see that a game is on Unreal 5, I already expect there to be crazy hitches, frame drops, performance issues in general, just because the way the engine was developed was made to make things look better, but that came with a price. And unless you have good quality engineers and programmers and tech artists and things like that that can make the game function well, just right out of the box in UE5, there's going to be a lot of issues. And I think they've done good work navigating that sea and making the game function well. There obviously is still crash conditions, there's FPS drops and performance issues, but in general, I think, on a wide swath perspective, the game is well made and well engineered. And this is doubly true for games that are built as a service, so live service games. Typically, it is like an ongoing battle to make sure that there isn't any degradation in performance. And I think there's been, several notable degradations that TFD has had, like when they added Contagion rework for Ultimate Freyna. That was a notable degradation in how well the game performed. Inez was another big one as well. And Axiom Planes was also a notable, on the graph, you could mark a point where like, hey, there's notable loss of performance. But in general, even with them removing last generation console support, the game, for as good as it looks, is very well made and has a very good foundation of support. So I got to give credit to the engineers on this project that kind of put the game together in a very stable and functional way. And I can't tell you how many games that look good, that perform like doo-doo, and that performance or functionality just makes the game immediately fall apart. Games like Wild Hearts, a Monster Hunter-esque game that came out. Beautiful, unique gameplay, super fun. I love Monster Hunter, but it ran like absolute doo-doo. Like, it just had like 10 FPS. Even if you optimized everything, you get to like 30 FPS. It was so bad, and things like that can kill a game on release. And this happens all the time. Tons of games, Borderlands 4, like a lot of games come out, and because of their, the engineering aspect to it or their preparation for performance, ends up killing the game right out of the gate. And I think TFD in general, though you may have anecdotal experience of the game running poorly for you, again, from a wide swath perspective, it runs well and looks great, and that's something that I don't think that anyone can realistically and reasonably take away from Magnum or the project. Another pro that I want to give them credit for is their, I'm just going to call it developer intention. I think in general, the developers overall are well-intentioned. They're very involved in the community, especially in the international community outside of languages that they naturally speak, and I think they're very focused. They care a lot about the game. They listen to the best of their ability to the community and do what they can to make things better. I think that they're definitely lacking in some areas in being able to deliver on what the community wants sometimes, with reworks. Like Jaber had to be reworked 7 times before he finally functioned. Keenan had to be reworked, actually buffed by orders of magnitude when he came out over multiple patches to get him to a point where he was very viable. Swords is a big example as well. Swords just coming out kind of non-functional, very weak in a lot of cases, having a lot of restrictions and things like that. And we'll get to that in a minute. But in general, I think that it's very obvious that the developers show up for the community to the best of their ability. They do what they can to implement changes that the community wants. And I think in general, we should all hope that the games that we like and care about have developers that are this involved and focused and, getting things that the community needs when they need them and kind of providing what they can without necessarily sacrificing the vision or whatever resources they have available on that project. And I think that it would be hard to make an argument that developers aren't involved. Now, there's definitely shortcomings and blind spots that they have. There's some other things that we'll talk about later in the video that I think that they could improve overall, but I think it is definitely evident that they care a lot, they're involved, and they want to make the game the best that it can be for their own resume, but also for the people that play the game and see it in general. And I think that kind of passion should be a default requirement for making games nowadays. I think there's definitely a lot of games out there that get made by companies, organization, founders, funders, those sort of things. They make games that are very clearly not built on passion or by developers that care about the game in general. And I think that's definitely something that TFD has going for it. But moving on to things that I would like to see improved. The first one is one that I don't really see talked about as much that probably needs to. And if I were to kind of if I could get a message to the developers in general, this is one of the things that I would focus on. And that is the concept of release cadence. I think that they need to, while they're kind of doing what they can to make sure that the cadence, they have regular updates coming out and content updates releasing, I think there is a very serious problem with the level of content that we're getting and how frequently we're getting it, especially comparing to, equal-sized games and studios releasing content. I think that they either need to, if they want to kind of do this piecemeal approach, which makes it feel like there's new patches coming out all the time, I think they either need to increase the speed of those updates, right? Realistically, we do, like, they kind of create this like bundle or bushel of content that they release. But ever since Ultimate Freyna, what they've done is they kind of create this package of content, then they chop it up into bite-sized portions, and then they slow feed us those portions over time. And so I think they either need to make those portions bigger, right? Like, we don't need appetizers. If the rate of content release that we have right now is going to stay the same, then they need to make the portions bigger, right? Like, Void Vessel should have come out, I think, with 2 or 3 Void Vessels, not just 1, and multiple weapons with maybe even a character. I think they definitely could make the bites bigger sized, or they can keep the piecemeal approach that they have right now, just speed it up. I think it's just, in general, for a live service game with where they're at right now, I think they could definitely stand to increase the rate of content that they release and how fast they release it, or make the releases bigger and more substantial. Oftentimes we get patches that are literally just a couple skins, or they add things like the lounge, which is a cool addition, but it feels like things like the lounge could have been a portion of a bigger patch, right? I feel like the lounge isn't really like sizable enough for them to say, hey, brand new patch, everybody log in. You can now look at your existing characters in a fixed area that just has their skins. Like, there's no gameplay elements to it. There's some collectibles added and things like that, but it just feels like they're giving you an appetizer, like someone rolled out carrots and celery with some ranch dressing, but you were hungry enough that you wanted an entree and a dessert to follow, right? It's like it's like bar food. They give you a can, they give you a bowl of peanuts at the bar, and that's all you have. And it feels like they could very easily, either, if they're going to be giving us peanuts and celery as our like the size of patches that we get, then they can make those come faster, right? Maybe 2 or 3 times a month if they're looking to have that size of patch, or make them bigger, right? Like, if you're gonna do like 1 patch a month or 1 patch every 2 months that's substantial, make that like level of content increase in size or volume so we can actually have more, right? Like, new character plus Axion Plains, and Axion Plains has like 2 or 3 levels to it, things like that. Like, I think the patches need to get bigger or come faster if they want to keep people interested for the long haul. And I think they're kind of getting to the point where they're relying a lot on cosmetics that come out, microtransactions, or potentially, extending out the grind time on new content so that it kind of like artificially feels like there's a lot to do. Like swords, for example, it feels like over time they've been increasing the length and duration of farm required to get new stuff, rather than trying to give us either a voluminous patch or lots of little patches in rapid fire that have very meaty, gameplay-oriented, focused releases that keep people engaged in the game long term. The next thing is, and I gotta be careful about how I talk about this in general, with these next 2 topics in general. Let's talk about the first one, which is related to the last topic. I think this is something that might just be a philosophy thing for Magnum in general, looking at the game overall, but I think they need to shift their approach on how they're trying to develop the game for the long term, right? Because it seems like right now, their focus is on creating what we can call content islands or content silos. That is an insulary encounter or gameplay loop that releases in a vacuum by itself, and that is the only thing that comes out of the patch, and all the new things are contained in that new piece of content. A good example of this is Axion Plains, Sigma Sector, the new Void Vessel. What they've been doing over time, which is something that I think that they need to get away from, and also something one of their major competitors, Warframe, learned like 6 years ago. Warframe decided that they're going to stop doing these content islands and instead try to create a playground. Like, Warframe just started adding all these secondary content elements, and they all interlock together, and there's different things that you can do, and there's different ways you can unlock things, but there's so much variety and breadth to what they're releasing that it ends up feeling like you have so much that you can do and you can bounce around and do things. Whereas the way that that's set up right now in the First Descendant is they tend to release this new content silo, and that's the only thing you do. Like, Sigma Sector comes out, you run Sigma Sector over and over and over and over until your eyes bleed and your brain turns to oatmeal and oozes out of your ears, and that's it. Then they release Axion Plains, and then you run Axion Plains over and over and over and over and over. Then they release the new Void Vessel, then you run Void Vessel over and over and over and over. And I think that the impact on that, as far as like on the long term, I think what that does is it starts making people look forward to patches and realizing that oh great, the new patch is going to come out, it's going to release the new content island, better go to the new island and just get my drinks on the beach and just spend all my time on that island, rather than trying to create an ecosystem that is interconnected, right? It's like they've been kind of doing little things like spreading out where you get weapon cores and allowing other things to drop, but I think they need to really sit down and consider how often they're releasing these ancillary pieces of content where all the new stuff is like hyper fixated, and that's the only thing that you do over time without any breaks, because I think that is something that will, whether they realize it or not, burn people out over time. Whereas what they could be doing is look at it more like a playground, right? You have your swing set and you have your monkey bars and you have your like whirly-do or whatever, but you don't try to make it so that when you add a new installment to the playground, you make all the kids go jump on the monkey bars and that's the only thing they can do over time. Obviously, if you're a brand new player, there's going to be things you have to get caught up on, right? Like you're definitely going to have to go level up your characters and get all your cores and get all your external components, and there's things going along with that. But I think that that's just more of like a backlog catch-up thing. Once you're mostly caught up or even fully caught up with full everything, it really just turns into what's the new island we're visiting, and whatever the new thing is this patch, I'm going to be playing it for 20 to 40 hours until I get everything I need, and then I'm going to log off and stop playing because there's no major interconnectivity between the activities that are available in the game. So what I'd like to see them do is actually just like try to connect the activities better together. An example of this, a very simple example, is they could make the new Void Vessel, the medium Void Vessel, they could make it so the blueprints come from the new Void Vessel, but the materials that you need to farm, they recently increased the amount of hours you need to put in to get the materials for the new swords, like trying to extend out that content and stretch it as long as they can. They could make parts of it available in other activities, or maybe even introduce a rotating queue that allows veteran players to do whatever activity people are queuing for at the time and help them clear that content and get the loot that they need while still getting what they need. Or maybe even they have these like openable boxes that you can use to select your reward. Maybe they add like resource or material boxes that can be picked up almost anywhere, and then you have these interconnected points where you're doing your 400% and you're doing your Void Erosion Purge and you're doing your Sigma Sector and you're doing all these other things, whereas the way it's set up right now, it almost feels like a checklist. Have you gotten everything you need from Sigma? Okay, never do it again. Have you gotten everything you need from Axion? Okay, never do it again. Have you gotten everything you need from Wall Crasher? Okay, never do it again, right? I think they need to actually find ways to make that function, and this also means that it's going to make multiplayer better as well. One thing you'll probably notice is that once the people that have fully built characters or fully built weapons get everything they need from a piece of content, they stop showing up, the matchmaking gets worse, because then you get people that are underbuilt or underprepared. You get 4 people that have an incomplete build in a queue when they queue up for a new piece of content. Then they're just going to start leaving, right? Because it goes slow. The people that are built and have the power that they need to complete that content aren't there anymore because they're done with it. And I think they need to find ways to get people back into the old stuff and find incentives for them to do that, to make it more of a healthy ecosystem, a playground that we're creating to make the game better. The next topic is one that I think is probably, at least from my perspective, and I'm quite confident in this being the case, but I think that by far the weakest failing point for the First Descendant, and one that if they were to put a significant effort into making the game better, this would be the first place that I look, and that is the game design and system design. I think in general, I say this as nicely as I can, but I think it is true. I think that, for all the pros that TFD has going for it, the game design, system design, and encounter design, enemy design in general is on the weaker side by far. A lot of the designs that you get, especially for these systems and things like that, feel in a lot of cases inelegant and outdated, like game design from like the 90s. Very basic, simplistic solutions with tons of restrictions that heavily restrict your creativity, build expression, theory crafting, and gameplay design in general. So one good example that I talk about a lot, especially when this came out, the system for modules and creating characters, I think in general, most builds, once they're optimized in the First Descendant, are very homogeneous. And that's because of the major restrictions they place on what we can do. These limited categories, like obviously you wouldn't want someone to run, you know, like just raw damage in every single slot. Like you need to have some forcing functions and restrictions to make sure the system has, you know, interesting choice, but I think that they're very far from that, to the point where I would say that the majority of modules in the game are not used because they don't have a purpose, or there's something else that does it better, which why would you create a system where there's something that is just infinitely better than all the other choices in the game, and so there's no reason to run that choice? They're slowly adding things that help build that, but I think they need to take a serious look at how the module system works, how the build expression works, how the systems overall work. And I think that if they want to make the game interesting long term, they need to keep improving upon it rather than just adding small little morsels. So one example I like to give is when Nell came out. She's a good example of like the restrictions and limitations in their system design specifically. So Nell, if you're running Nell as a bossing build, most Nell bossing builds are mostly the same. Like they're almost identical because she kind of has this trifecta of requirements. The first requirement, so let's look at this if you're new to TFD. Your red modules, your transcendent modules, that's a locked slot. You can't put anything but red modules in this slot. Same thing for your sub-module slot, this is locked out. So for a character, you have these 10 module slots to play around with. Now, normally in games that have high build expression, there would be drastic changes in what modules get run in these slots, and there would be a lot of different like pros and cons to weigh as you go. However, that's not really the case in the First Descendant because in general, I would say their game design, system design is just very limited. So for example, Nell, if you're running her as a bossing character, she's a character that happens to have the natural stats that allow her to run critical strike as a skill character. However, the way their system is built out, to do critical strike, there are 4 critical strike modules that you have to run. And some characters can get away with running 3 instead of 4 in general, but because you're a critical strike character, you now have 4 slots that will have the exact same 4 modules in that build. So now of your 10 modules, 4 of them just went away. Because she's a skill crit character, gone instantly. That choice is now taken out of your hands. You just remove it, put those 4 modules in, done. Okay, well, she's a skill-based character, and she has cooldowns, which means you're going to want to run cooldown. So now all of a sudden you're running cooldown, 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 cooldown. 4 more modules in order to get cooldown reduction. That's 8 modules out of your 10 available slots that essentially get chosen for you. There are some, plus or minuses. You can run other modules that have cooldown on them, and there's some, things that can kind of help you play around with that as well. You can run like, time distribution or whatever. You can run things like this that have a little bit less cooldown than things like MP conversion that lose MP versus gaining HP. But you can see that this one is 36% cooldown versus 14%. So this one is obviously superior if you can take the minus of the MP. So again, 8 out of your 10 modules are now deterministic. They're chosen for you. You don't really have much expression there. It's just, okay, get the modules that do that. Okay, now we have 8 out of 10, so now you have your 2 modules left. Well, she's also a character that needs MP recovery because she runs out of mana, so you need 1 or 2 MP modules. So now you're at 9 out of 10 modules, and then your last module is your build expression. Do you run defense, or are you willing to run more glass cannon? That sort of thing. Like, I feel like they're just, because of the way it's set up, it just kind of stymies a lot of the build expression that works in the game overall. Same thing goes for stats and systems. Again, they have heavy restrictions on everything that make it so a lot of your choices are kind of made for you. I just did a Kyle Lava Citadel build yesterday, and people were asking me why I was running an Enlightened Mage sensor on Kyle that had MP recovery in combat and max MP on the external component in general. And that's because there's only realistically like 2 to 4 stats on each external component that are good. The rest of them are deterministic, heavily restricted, and kept from the player in general. And so there isn't any choice that you could make on that slot. Like you can't re-roll those stats to something useful. Either you get MP or you don't, and there just isn't anything, major there. And so even though it kind of functions, it just feels like a lot of your choice is taken away from you because, again, as nicely as I can put it, it's inelegant and outdated on how it functions. Same thing for the cores on the external components. You have HP and defense or shield and defense. It just generally gets better. There's not a lot of choice to make there. There's not a lot of like really creative solutions like, oh, what if I did this? What if I did that? It's kind of like, okay, these are the best stats. This is the slot you have choice. Because it's heavily restricted, that's that. You're just trying to make the numbers go as high as possible, and that's what you get out of it. At least on the reactors, we still have some that you'll get that are like, okay, maybe you run this over that, but there's always going to be like something that just makes the most sense for that build. And I think that kind of really restricts how people play the game because, it just feels like it's very oversimplified. And that's not necessarily a horrible thing. There are a lot of games out there that are built to be highly casual, which means you just kind of, the choice is taken away from you in a lot of ways, and it's more just about the experience of collecting, grinding, getting the things that you need. It is a looter shooter. The primary gameplay loop will always be grinding and looting, and that's kind of the whole point. So having that kind of built in there, it doesn't necessarily, it needs to be that way. And maybe there's a directive from Nexon or the directors on the project that say, hey, don't make anything too complicated or too expressive so that we can make sure that it's available to all people. But I do think that that's one of the major aspects to the game that needs to be improved. But I think that extends to pretty much every area of the game as well. I think the sword release is a good example of that. When they released the swords that came out, they created new stats for all of them, new modules for all of them, put heavy restrictions on all of them, and then also made it so that gun or firearm attack or explosive attack characters can't modify the swords either. So again, you have these massive walls and restrictions and gates being placed everywhere that heavily stymie your ability to create interesting things in the game, to the point where like the swords in the game right now just feel like they're just, it feels like they don't really have a home. Like there's so many restrictions on them that even scaling them becomes incredibly difficult. The characters that you would think would be good at using them aren't because of the way they're implemented. And I think that's just kind of the big thing. So either there could be one of two problems here. Either A, there's someone at a high level, a stakeholder at Magnum or a stakeholder at Nexon that is forcing people, the designers and developers to make choices that are overly simplistic, that is kind of like getting in the way. And so the solution to that in general would be to get those people out of the way and empower the designers and developers that are making these choices to make interesting, cool choices. Or if the problem is in the departments that are making these choices themselves, I think we're kind of at a point where you may want to consider staffing decisions that help improve that. South Korea is not a country that is known for having a lack of talent when it comes to game design. The gaming industry in Korea is booming. It always has been. It is one of the premier areas for game in general. They also have lots of games in Korea that are heavily focused on system design in general. Like a lot of like the MMOs, grinding games, RPG games, all of these games have a wealth of people in that industry that are very, very good at making extremely elegant and exciting systems and gameplay design that are really cool and interesting. And I don't think there's any excuse for TFD to be so far below that bar when they release things, right? There's no excuse for them to have, these new modules that come out that are very meh and flat, or swords that come out that are so overly just suffocated with the restrictions and limitations that are placed on them, to the point where you're not even sure why you would run a sword in the first place for most of the content, other than just having variety. It feels like that's kind of where things come out in TFD sometimes, where they release something and it's just, yeah, it's worse than other things, but at least it's something different, right? Like sometimes you just want to have a margarita pizza instead of a pepperoni pizza, even though you like pepperoni better, just because it's something different and it keeps the spice of life going. I feel like they need to have better, more like modern gameplay designs and system designs that suit the game well. And I would argue that this is by far the weakest area of the game, that they could, with the money that they're getting from Nexon and from all these skin sales, hire people or empower people to make better system designs, better encounter designs, and better overall experiences that would make the game shine, because pretty much every other aspect of the game is high quality. I think this just extends to the gameplay encounters as well. I think the medium void vessel is a good example, but really any commander level enemy or boss level enemy in the game, it just feels like a lot of times it's like Wall Crasher. He just stomps around and drops meteors with AoEs. Like there's not a whole lot of mechanics there. I mean, there's definitely been better mechanics in general in the past that, some were poorly implemented or poorly designed. And so the community didn't like it. And the developers took that as maybe we shouldn't have more complicated or interesting encounters in the game because players don't like it, when realistically it was more just that they implemented it rather poorly, and because of that they got a bad feedback loop from it, and then they kind of just got scared and started backing off of it. I think the Arcade Slayer is a good example. Homie just walks around and swings his sword, dashes around a couple times and throws projectiles, and then goes immune. Like it doesn't feel like it's like, and they added silence to it. Like this is kind of how I feel about a lot of the commander level enemies in the game. They just walk around like derps. Like the Axiom Plane elites just jump up and land far away from you for no reason. A lot of the infiltration operation commanders that you face will just back away and hide behind a wall for no reason. And a lot of times it just kind of like, I don't know, it just feels like really simplistic, very inelegant, and just like overly simplified. Even like there were a lot of people that were complaining about the game being too easy or clearing all the content, and so they decided, okay, we're gonna fix that. And their solution to fixing the everyone blast the whole screen in one go and everything's easy was, well, let's increase the HP and add damage reduction to the enemies. Which is basically like the old dad solution to the problem, right? Like it's not an elegant solution. I guess it kind of works, but it's kind of like, you know, back in the day when we had difficulty scalers in like early 90s, early 2000 games, it was just add more HP and take away ammo. Like it wasn't a very elegant solution. It doesn't feel very good. I guess, yeah, everything takes longer now, but it doesn't feel like there's so many other choices they could have made, so many other references they could pull from, so many other games and other ideas they could have had to solve this problem. Like bring someone from MapleStory Online, have them show you what systems look like, or bring someone from Path of Exile, or like there's just so many other references that you could use to make the game a lot more ecstatic and exciting and interesting and really compelling in a lot of ways. And I feel like they just kind of either sell themselves short, aim for a very low bar, or maybe they just don't have the expertise or experience required to make some of these things work and shine. Now, that doesn't mean that they haven't had really cool designs. I think Ultimate Freynez rework was really, really cool. I really enjoyed the addition of Inez, even though they made some choices about the balancing that was kind of hard for the community in general. Let's not talk about Serena and how over-bloated that kid is. I don't really know about that one, but I think Ultimate Luna is a good example. Ultimate Luna came out, the 2 modules added for Ultimate Luna I think were really good. Not only is it cool to see Ultimate Lunas walking around, shooting laser beams and dancing on their platform, but I think that also added some really cool additions to Luna overall and was a general good success. Keelan was also a really good example as well, kind of having that aspect added to him too. I think there's definitely been some really big wins for them in general, but I would say, like, across the whole board, a lot of times I'm usually not very impressed with their game design, system design, or encounter design coming into the game. It just feels really outdated, old school, and hyper simplified in a lot of ways that it's just kind of like, it's focusing on you jumping through the hurdles, checking all the boxes and getting everything done, rather than trying to wow you or excite you with what they bring out or bring to the fold. So that's kind of where my head is at on the First Descendant and where I think they should focus on trying to improve in the future. Let me know where your head is at as well, if you agree with these points or if you have other points you'd like to see. But I think these are the biggest things that need to be focused on for the game moving on into the future as they try to make things better. I'd love to see more character development and cutscenes like this one and things like that. But I think that's kind of separate from some of the elements that we were talking about earlier. And again, let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people. And don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.